dive right into your sports, which you, of course, cover on the Sports Huddle, WCCO AM 830 and Odyssey Network. What were you guys talking about this weekend, and/or what do you want to talk about today on this section of the Rebels Den?
We did talk a little bit about this yesterday as well, John, but I think it's fun to talk about it here as well, especially from the video perspective and, all the different outlets that we've got. But I think NFL tampering is an interesting one, right? I mean, anybody who's following the NFL understands the storyline. It's not just one, there's multiple different cases, but the primary one, Kirk Cousins, and the fact that they were tampering. The Atlanta Falcons decided to do a lot of things, and Kirk might have opened his mouth a little too much about, well, they're going to have to get some of the travel taken care of and this, that, and the other. And it's like, wait a minute. You can't be talking in those 2 days before you get to that Wednesday when it really opens up for free agency. First of all, I think that's ludicrous. They got to figure that whole thing out. Number one, John, is, okay, so it's kind of tampering. It's kind of not. I mean, there's nothing that's really, really clear. And I think that's a bit of a problem. But I went through it and I was looking and I was saying, well, the Chiefs a couple of years ago, John, they got fined basically almost identical to what we're seeing right now going on with the Kirk Cousins incident, where $250,000. Okay, so that's to the team. Andy Reid had to pay $75,000, and the GM had to pay $25,000 because they were going after Jeremy Maclin, right? I mean, so that was something, and they were tampering. So that's what they did. Oh, and by the way, they lost a third and a sixth rounder. So that's all part of what the slap on the wrist really was. Now, I say that because what really can stop this is what they did a few years ago with the Miami Dolphins, John, when they reached out to Sean Payton and to Tom Brady. And the NFL took a look at this thing and they're like, hey, wait a minute now. You just lost your first round pick and your third round pick. A first round pick hurts, right? I mean, you take away a fifth or a sixth or maybe even up to a third, not that big a deal. You take a first and a third. I would guarantee you one thing. The owner, Ross, and another one of the owners, Beal, who took fines as well, $1.5 million and $500,000 each. I don't think Miami's ever going to do this again. Now, I say that, and I look over at Ross, who owns the team, the primary owner, and I'm like, well, $1.5 million to a guy like that, he can sneeze that, John. So it's not that big of a deal. But nonetheless, I think the NFL has to clean this up. They got to figure it out. And I think it's really more on them than the teams and the tampering that they're calling tampering. But if you're going to really hit them hard, I guarantee you this. If they said to Atlanta, you know what, that's fine, you got Kirk Cousins, you don't get a first rounder in 2025, they'd be crying just a little bit, but that's too bad. They've got to figure this out. What do you think about this whole thing?
Well, I think it's kind of ludicrous, Pete, that they have the free agency signing so far away from the last game of the year, because the last game's Super Bowl. It used to be that they'd have Pro Bowl and things like that, Pete, that would occur after the Super Bowl. Sometimes then they moved it to before the Super Bowl, but these days the Super Bowl is the final game.
Yeah.
So I would say a week after the Super Bowl, they should make that free agency. That the contracts only run till then, and then do exactly what you said. Come down hard on anybody that is tampering before that date. But give them a week and then say, hey, free agents? Yeah. I mean, I think partially, Pete, the way it goes right now, it works because they love the fact that they can talk about it on the NFL Network. And as you've said, it extends their season, for months and months. And then all of a sudden, hey, it's OTA. Hey, it's mini camp. Hey, it's this, and the preseason starts up, so it keeps it rolling year round. It still would, but I think, put a hard and fast date on it that is much closer to that final game, the Super Bowl, whether it's a week or two, and then do exactly what you said. Hey, tampering, if there's any tampering at all, it's a first rounder and a second or whatever. Yeah. And you wouldn't see anybody doing anything before that date then. Nobody would risk that.
I would say that is 100% right. It's all about the risk and the reward, right? Just like our business in the options world, risk and reward. Well, it's the same thing in sports. That's why we do this. That's why we talk about the sports blitz. We both played in the NFL. It's really similar, right? And if the penalty is high enough, John, it will keep you from doing some of these things. I can guarantee you that. So I would say this actually is probably putting a little bit of a shock into the league right now. But by the way, Roger Goodell, who does he work for? The owners. So they've got to get together and figure this out. And there's enough good owners out there that probably wouldn't tamper, that I think that you could get a majority to go in there and say exactly like you were saying, John. Hey man, you're taking a first, or we're taking your first and your second. Sorry, but that's just the way it goes. How about this, John? In college football, college sports, really, you've got all these conferences. Now, the Big 12 conference is very heavily considering what they want to do with naming rights. And so we have already ruined college football to some degree, in my opinion, with the NIL. We've done it with the way they've created the portal, where you can just go in there whenever you want and just throw yourself in there every year, every other year, whatever you want to do. They are ruining things. But now I want to sponsor something. Now, I get it. You can get money this way, right? How about the All-State 12? Not the Big 12, the All-State 12. Now, the only reason that might make sense to start doing that, let's be honest, John. You know what teams are in the ACC right now? Let's see. It's Florida State, it's Clemson, it's Cal, it's Stanford. Wait a minute. Cal and Stanford are on the Pacific Coast, aren't they? They're not in the Atlantic. What the hell is that? So, you know what? These conferences don't mean anything anymore. They've been other names anyway, and blah, blah, blah. And sooner or later, I think this is going to happen. But the one that kind of bothers me, John, is this one. Private equity wants to get involved now, right? They want to invest in conferences, right? And they've been talking about this. Now, here's the problem I have with that. Do you have concerns? So I'm asking you, you're much better with this type of stuff than I am. But so right now, private equity goes in for a 20% stake of the Big 12 for $1 billion, okay? Now, what happens if that private equity firm, and this does happen, has an issue financially? What happens then, right? I mean, so if they're investing in here and all of a sudden they go kaput over here, what happens with the Big 12? What happens with that stake that they've got out there with this private equity group and everything else? That concerns me probably more than the sponsorship. What do you think on this topic? It's right up our wheelhouse, man. It's sports and it's money. So we kind of got this one cornered.
Well, I like the way that our friends over at ESPN come up with nicknames like the Norris division and things like that in hockey.
Yeah.
And and by the way, ESPN folks, for those of you who don't know, it used to stand for Eastern Sports Programming Network, ESPN. But then, of course, it became just, sort of like Xerox for making copies. It really did. It encompassed all sports, not just Eastern sports, and not just hockey, as it was more or less set up to be, I guess, Pete. Mm-hmm. But I would say it would be about the same, Pete, as something like the FTX Arena, which used to be the American Airlines Arena in Miami. And then FTX bought that naming right for the arena. I think it lasted 1 year. And then Sam Bankman-Fried bankrupted his company, basically, by he was accused of and convicted of theft. So we'll say that he was a thief and took that money, and they took his name off that arena. I would think the same thing would happen, Pete, with the Big 12 if it instead went from Cerberus Big 12 or whatever, Blackstone Big 12 or whatever, firm might put their name on it. If something bad happened and they couldn't make the payments, same thing as any of the stadium rights deals that have occurred and fallen apart since. Because several have. Remember, there used to be a curse of a stadium naming rights. AT&T has managed to survive pretty well as the Cowboys naming right down there for the Cowboys Stadium. But there are examples, plenty of them, where companies have failed and then they took the naming right away because they weren't able to pay anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think the same would be true, Pete, with private equity. They just put it back up for auction and see who wants to pay.
Yeah. It could be really interesting. Well, anyway, we've got all this realignment, John, and anything. So I guess if you're going to go for it, you go for the sponsorship part of it. I don't know about the investment part, but the sponsorship part, I mean, you've got Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado all coming into the Big 12. So if that truly is the all-state 12, which is truly what a lot of people think it's going to be, I guess if you're going to do it, now's the time, right? I mean, it's no longer the Big 8 like you and I knew it that turned into the Big 12, or the Pac 8 that turned into the Pac 12, and now it turned into the what? The nothing. So it's interesting. It's an interesting time in sports, and money always leads the way, John. It always does.
Yeah. Well, you give people the equivalent of a $3 or $4 billion franchise in college sports. And it's going to change some things, no doubt about it.